Chapter 11, Eat. The bus ride was silent. The sound of clattering and rustling disturbed the peace. Tires bouncing over uneven roads, an old man coughing, the stairs leading to the top deck creaking. It was a cluster of noise which only added pressure onto Corey's pounding headache. Dorian hadn't brought his bike to school with him. He'd come straight from the hospital that morning, taking the bus with the rest of the commuters, so now he and Corey were on a short but sweaty journey home, sharing uneasy glances but no words. When they reached Dorian's house, Corey was surprised to see it even more neglected than usual. The sink was piling up with unwashed dishes, the bin overflowing with rubbish, the table cluttered with empty beer cans. Dorian quickly swiped the table clean, tossing the tins into the bursting bin. "Sorry," he apologized sheepishly, rubbing the back of his neck. "Sometimes when I don't know how to cope, I just drink," he admitted bashfully. He was suffering from a hangover as well, Corey deduced. "Why don't you have a nap? You look tired," he suggested. Dorian shook his head dismissively. "It's okay." "Why not? You're here." Dorian shrugged. What he meant was, "I can't waste your presence. I like you too much to sleep through your company." "So?" Corey frowned, propping himself up onto the kitchen counter, suppressing a wince after putting too much weight on his bruised arms. "I don't mind. I'm not going anywhere." He shrugged. "Do you want to stay?" Dorian asked abruptly. He was overcome by a sudden burst of boldness, and the words spilled out without his consent. "I mean, you can stay here for a few days, if you want," he offered. "My mum will be in hospital all week and your dad. Doriana, it's fine if you don't want to. I get it." He covered his tracks quickly, trying not to reveal how much he actually liked the boy stood in his dirty kitchen, watching him with such bright green eyes they were almost blinding. "Do you want me to?" Dorian gulped. "Yeah, I do." But Corey didn't reject his offer, nor accept it. Instead, he asked the question that caught Dorian completely off guard. "What would your friends say?" He whispered, averting his eyes to his feet, swinging back and forth from where he was sat on the worktop. "If they knew you were hanging out with me, I mean," he added after a short pause. Dorian smiled, leaning against the dining table, opposite to where Corey was sat. "Since when do you care about what other people think?" He grinned. "I thought all that mattered was beauty? I don't care about other people," he assured him. "But you do. And I'm not an asshole. I consider other people's feelings, okay?" Dorian's heart warmed at the statement and his smile grew. "We're not in a cringeworthy movie about defying the stereotypes. I'll be friends with whoever the fuck I want, and you should too. If people care enough to judge us, then let them. Fuck them." Corey smiled. Corey fucking Winters fucking smiled. And it wasn't like before. It wasn't a flash, a glimpse, a moment. No, it was bright and beaming and happy. It was beautiful. He was beautiful. His dimples deepened, his eyes shone, his face lit up. And suddenly, Dorian wanted to do everything he possibly could to keep that smile on his face. To see it every day, to never stop catching that light shining in his eyes. It would be hard, but he was going to try. He had to try. "Yeah. I'll stay." Corey nodded, the remnants of the grin still evident on his face. "Thank you." Dorian smiled brightly in return. "You hungry?" Corey's heart sunk and he swallowed hard. He couldn't remember the last time he'd eaten. Not this morning, not last night, possibly not at all yesterday. He wasn't sure. "Not really," he lied. "Eat. You sure?" "I skipped breakfast, so I'm gonna make something. My omelets are to die for. You'll be missing out," Dorian persuaded lightly. "Eat." "No, I'm okay." "Eat." "Whatever you say." He shrugged. "You can put your stuff upstairs if you want." Chapter 12, Art's Aim. Sleep itched at Dorian's eyes, but he refused to succumb to it. His phone screen continuously flashed with notifications, vibrating to alert him of a new message. But he ignored it, his nose buried in a book. He'd almost finished the picture of Dorian Gray and refused to even glance at his phone. His friends could wait, they could wonder a little longer. Let them ponder why he was absent for a second day in a row. He would message them later, letting them know he was okay. "Sorry," a mumbled voice made him flinch, dragging him back to reality, out of the fictitious world Oscar Wilde had created. "You can have your bed back now." Corey was stood in the doorway of the living room, rubbing his eyes and trying to suppress a yawn. He was drowsy and intoxicated with tiredness, barely able to keep his eyes open. "It's okay." Dorian quickly assured him, folding the corner of his page over and placing the book on the coffee table. He was sat on the sofa, a blanket draped over his lap and a coffee mug sitting expectantly on the table. "What time is it?" Corey asked, plopping down onto the sofa beside Dorian, tucking the blanket over himself too. "Almost 2. Fuck, I slept all day," he murmured apologetically. "I'm sorry. It's fine." Dorian chuckled. "It gave me a chance to get to know my good friend Oscar." "You finished it yet?" "Almost. About a chapter left. Do you know what I mean now? Art for art's sake." Dorian echoed Corey's words from one of their first conversations. It was an aesthetic movement from the 19th century. Oscar Wilde was pretty into it. Corey shrugged. Dorian shifted on the sofa, turning to face Corey directly. "I don't get it. I don't see how you can completely detach yourself from your work like that. How is it possible to write something so meaningful and dismiss it as purely beauty? There's gotta be something of you in your poems. To reveal art and conceal the artist is art's aim." Corey quoted. He didn't even think, the words just appeared in his brain and fell past his lips. "Yeah, it's art's aim, but that doesn't mean you can do that every time. Haven't you ever written a poem and when you read it back you realize how much of yourself you've put into it?" Smudged words scrawled across crumpled paper fabricated within his mind. The poem he'd written about the boy sat in front of his. His alluringly sinister eyes matched with his lopsided smile. His lips, his touch, his voice, his accent, him. Everything about him had been twisted into letters on a page and smudged ink on his fingertips. But that wasn't the only poem he'd written with feeling. His art didn't always exist within itself, detached from any deeper meaning or values. Sometimes it was raw and real and ripped out a little part of his soul. But he tried to write from aestheticism alone. It was his style and it always would be. Any poem about anything beyond the simple virtues of beauty he merely threw away. Except for the one about Dorian. He kept that one, fished it out of his bin and slipped it into his notebook. "No." Corey lied. "I've never written one with even a hint of myself in it." Dorian sighed in defeat. He'd failed to crack the hard exterior of Corey's personality once again. But he'd keep trying. He'd try again and again and again. He'd try until he saw that pretty smile resurface, and he wouldn't stop trying until the same smile was a permanent feature on Corey's face. "Are you hungry yet?" Corey sunk further into the soft cushions of the sofa, pulling the blanket over his shoulders to retain heat. Their bodies were close together beneath the fluffy blanket, and Corey's head continuously lulled to the side with tiredness, threatening to fall onto Dorian's shoulder before he stopped himself moments before. "No, not really." "You sure?" Dorian asked with concern. "You haven't eaten all day." I said I was fine." Corey cut him off. Dorian sighed and nodded in acknowledgement. "Okay. If you say so. You should get that." Corey's eyes were trained on Dorian. Chapter 13, Dorian Corey. Corey was staring at the frozen TV screen, waiting for Dorian to return. He could hear the faint mumble of muffled voices, but they were too vague to make out. So, he waited in silence, wondering who was stood on the other side of the door. As he waited, his attention was caught by the book sitting unfinished on the coffee table. His life had become momentary distractions, temporary tasks to occupy his thoughts before he was absorbed by depression and self-loathing. If he filled every available second with something to look at, something to do, something to think about, he'd never have to confront the demons living within his very head. So he picked up the book, his next temporary distraction. He didn't really read it. He just flicked through the pages and skim-read the text. He was surprised to find that it wasn't a clean copy but awash with Dorian's personal notes and thoughts. It was a library's copy, so he couldn't write directly in it, but that didn't seem to stop him. Half the pages had post-it notes clinging to them, covered in a messy scrawl. He'd written out quotes and scrawled question marks beneath them. But what intrigued Corey was the use of his own name. Over and over and over, Dorian would highlight a certain passage by placing a sticky note down on the majority of them apparently relevant to Corey. They were usually about art and beauty and aestheticism. Some were about love, morality, romance, decadence. But they always somehow linked back to the boy Dorian sat next to in English class. Corey. Corey, 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 Corey. Sometimes Dorian would get lazy and just write one letter. C. But Corey knew. He flinched when he heard the front door slam shut and the voices became clearer, crisper. It was loud enough for him to distinguish that it had been a girl at the door, and she was now inside the house. Corey hastily shut the book and tossed it back onto the table, leaning back nonchalantly onto the sofa. When the pair entered, Corey noted Dorian's flushed expression. He looked spaced out and concerned. Corey's immediate thought was, does he like her? He quickly scrapped that even if he did, it was none of Corey's business. Dorian was allowed to like whoever he wanted. Plus, he couldn't blame him. The girl was gorgeous. Corey recognized her as being on the hockey team and knew she was one of Dorian's friends. She wore no makeup, but her skin had a natural healthy glow to it and her smile illuminated her face. "Hi. I'm Leah," she greeted. "Corey," he replied softly. Dorian took his place beside Corey once more, pulling the blanket back over his body and scooting closer for warmth. They were so close, Corey could practically hear his heart beating. "What happened to your face?" Leah asked Corey worriedly, taking a seat in the armchair by the sofa. "And nothing," he responded. "Corey's not exactly a talker," Dorian interjected, attempting to lighten the mood. "Do you want anything, Lee? A drink or something to eat?" She shook her head. "Nah, I'm okay. I bought some stuff." She gestured to the plastic bag and pulled out a packet of popcorn, chucking it towards the boys on the sofa. "Press play then," she urged impatiently, glancing at the TV. Dorian did as told and resumed the film, but his mind was somewhere else. Not on the film or even the pretty boy sat beside him. It wasn't on his friend who had come to check up on him but only made him internally freak out. It was on Leah's brother, Micah. He was in the year below and possibly even more of a twink than Corey was. He wore more makeup than half the girls Dorian knew and his hair was always pinned back with butterfly clips. The fact that Micah was so feminine was most likely the reason Dorian had ended up taking things too far with him. It was justifiable, he was a boy, but he looked like enough of a girl to get away with it. Leah had broken up with him the month before and Dorian was a hormonal, horny mess. Luckily there weren't any bad feelings between him and Leah.